On today's edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast, we're talking training camp. Eagles players officially reported to the NovaCare Complex today. Who's going to be the stars of camp, maybe even if they're not in the starting lineup? We're going to talk about the state of the running back position right now across the NFL, a big topic across the league. Also, what starters are going to rest this summer for the most part? Who needs to be on the field for camp in the preseason? All that and more on this Tuesday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Shout out to our everydayers, Monday through Friday right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Louis DiBiase, joined as always by my co-host Gino Camilleri. And today's show is brought to you by eBay Motors. This episode of Locked On Eagles always presented by our great partners over at eBay Motors. A championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. Same with your vehicle. So for parts that fit, head to eBay Motors and look for the green check. Stay in the game with eBay Guaranteed Fit. ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit. Only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions do apply. Gino, the Philadelphia Eagles have reported to the NovaCare Complex. Training camp's here, man. Football time is with us. I saw today they were doing the promos for, I'm sure, all the primetime games. Everybody's in the uniform. Still no Kelly Green uniform yet. We're going to get to that, I'm hoping, this week. The social media team's been trolling us to death over the last few days. But so great to see all the players come back and practice this week, man. It's time. Summer vacation's over.
The news that's coming out around the NFL, I mean, whether it's from underrated free agents or unsigned free agents that are finding teams right now, or some huge deals, the Justin Herbert mega contract now making Jalen
like
Hurts.
that. Jalen Hurts is what, like the third highest paid
third
quarterback
highest
in the
QB
league? Before
already,
you know it, he's
man.
going to be seventh or eighth.
So those discussions we were talking about earlier this offseason are already coming to fruition, and with how many guys are being signed last minute and how many positions the Eagles could upgrade at linebacker, at safety, and they're always looking. Could they sign a guy tomorrow at the start of camp? They already brought in Deon Cain today.
Yeah.
They worked out N'Keal Harry as well, a former first-round pick of the Patriots. So they're always looking for ways to find these guys that could challenge and battle for spots and potentially win the most prestigious preseason award in all of sport, the Ja'Cory Shepherd Locked On Eagles annual award. Some great winners. Could Deon Cain be that guy? And
last summer he was good, man. And he was
I think him and Devin Allen, if they can put the football thing together at an NFL level, Lou, those are going to be the guys you want to look at. And especially playing against some of these corners that might be the 7th, 8th, and 9th option, right? How many guys at that level are going to run a 4-3 like Devin Allen can in the open field? And I'd like to see Jaden Hazelwood come out there. I'd like to see some of these tight ends maybe get something out of Tyree Jackson, but those skill position players, very on brand with what's going on our discussion today around running back. I think it's on brand that these guys are going to have to show out if they want to push for what is a very loaded top part of this roster.
Yeah, and Gino, it's interesting. I kind of wanted to start the show with who's going to be the standouts of camp because, Nick Sirianni's approach, and it's the right one, is let's get our veterans, our main stars through this summer healthy. Even if, they don't practice as much, they are not going to touch the field during the preseason. I mean, Jalen Hurts played, one series last year, drove down the field, scored. You didn't see him again for 3-4 weeks. They have the joint practices for that too. That's a lot of where the starters get their tune-up before the season. But Sirianni's got the right approach. He's like, even if we're a little rusty to start, which they weren't, by the way, last year, so that whole concern was thrown out the window when the Eagles started, 13-0 or whatever it was. So they are going to stay healthy, and that's going to be the approach. So a lot of these second and third teamers, like the Deon Cains, as you mentioned, the Devin Allens, they're going to get their opportunities. And I think that's a good approach. I think who the stars are going to be. Deon Cain, of course, just won MVP for the USFL, right? In the finals. But last summer, he was pretty good too. I think skill position players, and maybe just because that's what fans pay attention to more. But, when I think of past camp standouts, I think of Paul Turner comes to mind, right? And Greg Ward was one of those guys for a while. Ifeanyi Moma's a name, or Carlton Agudosi, all these wide receivers. So, I wouldn't be surprised at all if there is a guy or two that push and you start to say, Do you keep a number 6 receiver? Does somebody push Britton Covey? It's not like a super sexy depth chart below your top 4, but yeah, I think a couple of those guys have some potential, so it's going to be interesting to watch.
Yeah, you look at Deshaun Hall last year. That's in 2019 rather. He was the guy that everybody fell in love with. And you look at some names like Reed Blankenship last year and Deion Kane and even Jason Huntley, who we had talked about for the longest time at the running back position. Could he potentially challenge for a special teams role?
You're right. Some of those guys, some of the times it's just smoke. It's the summer. It's the preseason. We talk ourselves into a Rasheed Bailey, right? But sometimes, as you mentioned with Reed Blankenship, it does translate to 100%. The regular season.
Quez Watkins as well in 2021, dude.
Yes.
Great preseason.
Quez had a huge preseason, and he had a really good 2021 season. Go all the way back to when Raheem Mostert had a great preseason, and then a few years later, he's a key piece to a team making a Super Bowl run in San Francisco. So, I do think, you of course take this with a grain of salt, what these guys do in the summer, the second and third teamers. But we saw the 2019 Eagles alone, what all those practice squad and backup level players did to help them win the division. So you have to take this seriously, not just for depth, but I think a lot of these guys can play. They just need an opportunity. And for the Eagles, because of how loaded they are in the camp strategy, they're going to get some chances.
And I think if you look at the defensive line as well, because we know that offensive lines are starving across the National Football League, and you look at the Eagles' defensive line where you're saying, is Teron Jackson really going to be lining up against second and third team players when he is a legitimate 53-man roster guy on most other teams, but the Eagles just have 12 guys that they could keep on the defensive line, or even at cornerback, Lou? Are there going to be games where teams struggle to complete passes in the preseason because they do have such good depth at that cornerback position? I would love to see a combination of Josh Jobe and Eli Ricks out there and what those guys can do. Let's see if you can play against guys that are potentially the fourth or fifth best option on the field.
Yeah, the receivers are going to have a tough time. I think the corner depth this year is really good. So, those players trying to push for that fifth and sixth spot as a pass catcher, they have a lot of competition. I think you mentioned the defensive line. 2 guys I think are going to steal the show. And because they're younger, they're going to be featured more than the likes of Fletcher Cox and, Brandon Graham, even Hassan Reddick and Josh Sweat. I think you look at the interior, just based on, I think, the step that one of these guys is going to take in year 3, and the other one just the pure talent. You're going to be like, how did this kid fall to pick 9? Jalen Carter and Milton Williams, I think, are going to be the 2 players that every day at practice you say just blew up multiple plays.
Yeah, I was thinking more of the game approach, but I love what you're saying with the one-on-ones where these guys are going to go out there and absolutely dominate.
And you already heard that in OTAs with Jalen.
Yeah, and Jordan Davis, too. Did you see him in the promo pictures today? The dude looks lighter. He looks cut up. He looks ready to go. If he's in fighting shape, it's going to be tough sledding for the guys like Cameron Tom and Sua Opeta that are going to have to deal with these guys day in and day out. And, man, it's going to be such a good contest every day at the wide receiver versus corner position. And the one that I want to see, because I know the corners and the wide receivers, it's going to be 50-50. AJ and Devontae are going to win some. James and Darius are going to win some. But who's going to cover Dallas Goedert? Who's going to be the guy that steps up and says, oh, we locked him down in practice today. On 3 reps, Terrell Edmonds held Dallas Goedert to 1 catch and on a short slant and broke up 2 of them.
Maybe it's Nakobe Dean. I think, Gino, potentially. I think like Milton Williams and Jalen Carter, the 2 players I'm predicting are just going to have an incredible summer. Yep. 2 guys that I'm pretty confident in, but because of the roles they have this year, the step up from last year as rookies, that you're going to be watching and really paying attention to how they do. It's Nakobe Dean, Jordan Davis, those 2 Georgia kids from the 2022 draft. I'm going to be watching closely how they're doing this summer.
And we're going to see that tomorrow. How the practice schedule works out is that they have 3 types of practices. They have a closed practice, a walkthrough practice, which a lot of them are going to be like that this year. And then they have their open practices and joint practices. So tomorrow is a open practice to the media. We'll get some talking from Nick Sirianni at 9:30 in the morning, get practice at 10. We get walkthrough on Thursday, so that'll be closed. Friday is another open to media practice. Then they have an off day. Then another practice, then a walkthrough, and then they have no practice until next week on the 3rd. So they're keeping it light, Lou. They're keeping it very light. A lot of walkthrough days, a lot of keeping these guys healthy. And Nick Sirianni has a message. We know what these guys can do. And the days that are important are the 14th and 15th of August and the 22nd of August, which are the joint practices with the Browns, with the Colts. Those are the days we're going to go hard. We're
Good rosters too, talented quarterbacks.
Up until that point, we're going to get to the preseason game, rest our starters, but we go to those joint practices. We have 3 opportunities to see how we stack up against NFL level competition that isn't wearing the same jerseys as us. So
absolutely.
Tune into what they have to say in Nick Sirianni's press conference tomorrow. I can't wait. We're going to get back on schedule. This is what the every day in the summer should be like. You wake up, listen to football, watch football, hear all the stories from training camp. This is what this time of year is about. And I'm pumped for it, Lou. And we got a great opportunity this year to run it back with these guys, man. Let's do it.
I hope so. All right, Gino, I want to talk running back coming up next. The state of running back has been the talk of the league over the last few weeks, and within the NFC East, there was a running back contract handed out to Saquon Barkley over in New York, and based on what the Eagles are doing, it's something I think we got to talk about for sure. So we'll get into that coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. And guys, today's show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Sometimes in life, we're faced with tough choices, and the path forward isn't always clear. I think I've learned that more than any other time this year for sure. Whether you're dealing with decisions around careers, relationships, or anything else, therapy helps you stay connected to what you really want while you navigate life, so you can move forward with confidence and excitement about the future, not looking back at the past with regret. Trusting yourself to make decisions that align with your values is like anything. The more you practice it, the easier it gets. I've been doing BetterHelp actually now for about 4 months, and it's really helped me every single week change my perspective on how I go about things. If you're thinking of starting therapy, you got to give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. I go home from work, instantly log onto my computer, sometimes even after a podcast. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist. And if it doesn't work, I've switched a couple times. You switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Let therapy be your map with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. Again, that's BetterHelp, BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month of online therapy. All right, Eagles fans, we're continuing on this Tuesday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. Training camp underway. Practice begins tomorrow, as Gino mentioned before the break. Head coach Nick Sirianni meeting with the media at 9 o'clock in the morning. Practice open to the media. You will have tweets. The statistics I see sometimes with some of these beat reporters I think is ridiculous, so take everything with a grain of salt for that, for sure. But, Gino, there's a lot of good takeaways that we're going to have with this team, especially when it comes to the second and third team, as we mentioned. And one of the positions we're going to be watching really closely is running back. It's a brand new group. DeAndre Swift coming in, Rashad Penny. You've got Kenneth Gainwell in year 3. What's he going to look like? Boston Scott, Trey Sermon trying to push for a roster spot if there is one available for him. And you look at running back, it's a brand new group, as I mentioned, and the money, I mean, they're barely spending over $3 million guaranteed to these 5 players. Mm-hmm. And that's the state of, it's been like this for a while. The trend in the league at running back has been going this way for, I don't know. I mean, when would you say the running back market started to get like this, where teams are just going so by committee, they're barely throwing any money into it? After a rookie deal, they really, even the best of the best, it's hard for them to get that second contract. I mean, I don't know when it shifted, but you look at even the state of running back right now in the NFL is totally justified, but it's crazy. Even Saquon Barkley, who's in this division, I think is the only reason the Giants have any sort of threat on offense last year when they made the playoffs. He could only get a 1-year extension today, and it was barely over. It was just a little more than the franchise tag to get him to not hold out. Josh Jacobs is not going back to he was in the Vegas airport saying he doesn't know when he's coming back to the Raiders. It's a crazy state of the position, but I think it's honestly the reality is as crappy as it is for these players, like the approach the Eagles are taking, I think it's, as much as it sucks, as I mentioned, I think it's the right one, and I can't imagine it's going to change. I don't think there's any sort of collusion going on across the league.
Let's say 2 people walk into a supermarket, and there's watermelons on display,
Sense a
right?
Classic Gino Camilleri analogy coming on here.
2 people pick up the watermelon. One goes to the front, scans it, pays market value. They pay the $3 and whatever it is. The other person grabs the watermelon, goes up front, and says, I want to pay 7 times what this watermelon is worth. It's the same watermelon, right?
Yeah.
Everybody's eating the same thing. Everybody's getting a piece of the same fruit, and that's the running back market. You can choose to pay a quote-unquote generational type of player, but a generational type of player has produced just as much as that average player has. Look at the running backs that have won Super Bowls. Those guys aren't getting paid $8, $9, $10, $11 million. They're getting paid $1.2 million guaranteed.
When was the last time a star running back
guaranteed? It hasn't happened. There's no reason to pay that price.
Correct. And it's not to say like running back doesn't matter, because what LeGarrette Blount, Jay Ajayi, and Corey Clement did for the Eagles in the Super Bowl, nearly all combining for 300 scrimmage yards, was crucial. But as you mentioned, you can get 70%, 80% of the production from a star you're paying, $10+ million a year, like a Christian McCaffrey. I mean, look at Carolina. Is Deonta Foreman last year better than McCaffrey? No. But he had over 900 rushing yards. Like his production, McCaffrey's production was matched by like 65, 70% at like half the price. And that's the unfortunate reality for these players. But Gino, honestly, like, not every position in the NFL is going to make $20+ million a year. And with the league changing, and it's such a pass-heavy league, if you're not contributing to the pass game like a star receiver, a quarterback, even a pass-protecting left tackle, or an elite tight end, even if you're a pass-catching running back, this is just the reality. You age fast. There's too many good ones. It's easy to make up that production now with mobile quarterbacks and elite offensive lines, and you're not really part of the passing game as often as the money's worth. So I don't see that changing anytime soon. Like, there is no NFLPA thing. I don't think there's a strategy they can take.
No, there's no collusion at all. And if any position group wanted to talk about collusion, I would talk about safety over running back any day of the week, what those guys are getting whittled down to on contracts as opposed to the production that those guys put
and you
out.
Look at linebacker. The league is changing, so that position has become naturally less important, and the money's gone down. Like that, wide receivers 20 years ago were getting paid now what running backs get paid, and it was the reverse. So it's just the evolution of the game.
And when you look at the running back position as a whole, there's 32 guys that can be on the field at any given point, right? When you turn on a game on Sunday, there's a running back on one side of the field, there's a running back on the other side of the field. Yeah, you could go 21 personnel, but how often are you running 11 personnel where there's 3 wide receivers? Teams want multiple great pass catchers. The fact of the matter is, at wide receiver, there's more opportunity. There's a bigger market for more players to go out there and get their value. And that's why teams have to go out there and spend what it would cost to go get Alaskan King crab legs at that same market where you walk in and got the watermelon. Like you said, what happens with a piece of fruit? It ages fast. You drop it, it gets bruised. It doesn't hold up its value over time.
It's too easy to find other fruit, and it's not even a food that can sustain what you really need full time. So, and again, it does suck because you look at a running back, and the one thing I will say, is these rookie deals. If you're like a first round pick like Josh Jacobs, right? They get you on this cost controlled deal. They can 5th-year option you. They can tag you multiple times. Like they have 6 to 7 years of team control. By that point, any running back at this point that's 28+ years, 27+ years old. Look at even Dalvin Cook can't get on a team right now. He had over 1,000 yards last year. They're seen as damaged goods, but that's, again, just the sad reality. Even when they get a giant contract extension, quote unquote, for a running back, it's like third receiver money, which is, it's, again, it's sad they can't even get that, but it's the right way to approach it. Again, the Eagles will both continue to say it. It's the right way to go about this position because look at what you have for the money you spent in Philly.
Let's put it this way. If you were going to pay what the Giants are paying Saquon Barkley at $11 million as opposed to what you are paying your running backs, let's just put it at $4 million. Right. That's $7 million extra dollars that you could allocate to the position that actually helps the running back succeed, which is the offensive line. That's where you need to take that money. If I'm going to go cheap at running back and linebacker and safety, I'm doing it exactly the way the Eagles are and investing in the positions that matter. outside receiver, outside corner, and in the trenches, and at the quarterback position.
And it's a cap league.
That's
Gino,
how it works.
You can't throw big money at every position. So which ones?
No, this isn't the Saudi soccer league right now. Like that can't work. We're not throwing out Mbappe money at this point.
It's a lot. Again, let's use two examples. Like the 2018 Eagles couldn't run the ball, still nearly made the NFC Championship game. In the years where the Eagles couldn't throw the football, those were the years that they were terrible, i.e. 2020. And so, yeah, I think you're right. It's too easy to make up not just a different running back than, I made the Foreman comparison. But like you mentioned, if you have an elite offensive line, that's going to make up for not having a star running back. If you have a mobile quarterback like Jalen Hurts, the way the league is going so mobile quarterback heavy, those guys make up like 40% of your rushing production a lot of the time. If you're a Justin Fields in Chicago's backfield, why are you going to pay, even a David Montgomery in free agency? It wouldn't make any sense.
Unless you're Detroit and whatever you're doing at the running back position, which is insane. They think it's 1984.
Hey, but I'm not going to complain because it got the Eagles DeAndre Swift. So,
and the thing about the running back position is there's so many real life examples and outcomes of going against paying the position. That there's a theory that's almost been proven. It's at the point of
it's true.
The theory of dinosaurs where it's like 99.4% or 99.9%. They just can't name it a fact because they can't get it to 100.
Exactly. Gordon. I mean,
Ezekiel Elliott, Saquon Barkley, Adrian Peterson.
I saw Pro Football Talk. Mike Florio actually made a good point, which is crazy. But he mentioned that Zeke kind of had the right approach. After 2 years, he was already holding out. Which I think is like, if you're a running back, that's the move. Like, if you're going to try to get your money, you have to do it early. You can't be Le'Veon Bell and you have 3,000 touches to your name, and then you're trying to hold out at the age of 27. Like, that's not going to work. If you're Austin Eckler, the wear and tear that guy's taken now, for as good as he is, that's just the reality. You have to maybe do it earlier.
How old is Josh Jacobs?
Josh, I don't know. I mean, that's the 2019 draft, but he played at Bama for a few years too. Even him, he's at the end of a rookie deal.
He's 25 years old, so that makes a lot of sense, right? I'm not going – I had this discussion earlier.
But the NFL probably still sees Josh Jacobs and they're like, 2 more years?
But behind that Vegas line, I'm not going back there. I think it's the best way to do it. I think Saquon kind of crossed the picket line, right?
Yeah.
Like he's like, I'm just going to go play football, and Josh Jacobs is like, yeah, man, go ahead and make 909 more thousand than you were going to make on the franchise tag. Yeah. I don't get it. I love how the Eagles are approaching it, Lou. And I love the guys that they have. And DeAndre Swift, LaShawn McCoy was talking about him the other day.
I saw that.
He was hyping this kid up. And Shady knows running backs. I'm psyched to see this kid behind this Eagles offensive line.
Oh, yeah, again, Gino, running backs, they don't matter as much. But, like, it's the same thing we say about linebacker. You can't be terrible linebacker and not have a single one. We know the importance of what Nakobe Dean can do for this team. You got to have some talented running backs for sure. I mean, it can really help out your football team. So it's just, again, it's the money. There's too many of them that can be good for you. Yeah. So maybe that's another part. Exactly. Supply and demand. There's just too many running backs. I mean, kids maybe just got to stop playing the position.
Yeah,
and maybe
play wide receiver. Sorry.
And maybe,
what you got to do.
Maybe that's the fix is naturally now kids growing up are going to see these contracts that are not going to the running backs. They're going to see the pass heavy league, and maybe there will be less of them. And I don't know, maybe that helps a little bit, but I think regardless, this is kind of just the natural evolution of the NFL. And maybe 10 years down the road, it becomes a run heavy league again. Who knows? And then suddenly it reshifts. So definitely fascinating though. It's across the league. Everybody's talking about it. Like, what's the approach? Is it fair? What do you do? But I think we're both kind of on the same page there. And we love what the Eagles have in the backfield. Those starters, Gino, they're going to be playing a lot, I think, in camp. I think you're going to try to find out what you have in DeAndre Swift, what kind of role. Rashad Penny, can he stay healthy? Can Kenneth Gainwell make that jump in year 3? What do you have in Trey Sermon and Kennedy Brooks? So running back, I think, will be featured. To wrap up the show, I kind of want to talk about it because you mentioned it earlier in the show. Like Nick Sirianni's approach right now, he's not going to play a lot of his starters. Are there certain starters on both sides of the ball, though, you think they need to be out on the field? They're going to be featured more than most when it comes to practices, joint practices in the preseason?
Jason Kelce, Lane Johnson, Fletcher Cox, Brandon Graham.
Bubble wrap.
Load him up, put him in the garage. Like Andy Reid said about Deshaun Jackson.
Put the cover over the car.
Put the Ferrari in the garage until Sunday, right? Put them in the garage until they get to the regular season. Jalen Hurts, I'll take one series out of the kid, So let him get that arm fresh, make sure he feels 100% in-game action, let him see the speed a little bit. Outside of that, I'm playing the rookies, the young guys, the second-year guys, a ton. I think those guys
I agree.
are going to get the most out of this preseason, and it's going to be a great give and take of having those older guys that you are willing and able to sit because you know they're going to show up on day one ready to go. And at the same time, it's going to give those younger guys reps against guys that are trying to make the league that are a little bit older, 8th, 9th
Makes
year
them more
journeymen like
Gino.
Dennis Kelly and guys that on the other side of the football, they're trying to make the roster just like you are. But in those positions, those guys need to get on the field. And Nakobe Dean, one of the things we were always hesitant about was the kid didn't play a ton last year. But when he was on the field, you saw how electric he was. You actually have to see if they have that NFL play speed to where you can put them on the field, or if not, they're a liability because they don't match up to that level. Like Danny Watkins, for example, you go back to that. You're watching this kid play, and you're like, this kid cannot play guard. He's not up to the speed, and you knew it away.
What's the one you talk about all the time on the show? Was it Shelton Gibson?
Shelton Gibson when they went to when Howie Roseman walks into the first day of practice, and Shelton Gibson's there, and one of the coaches said, well, this guy can't catch. And that's exactly what you have to see. And these are the environments that they're going to be tested in. And I am very excited to see guys like Cam Jurgens, for example, Lou. Like, how does he do against those second unit offensive lines, or maybe even a starter, because he's going to get a lot of those starter reps. I think he plays a majority of the preseason. Same with Tyler Steen. Same with these younger guys that they have brought in on the other side of the ball.
You know what I'm interested in, though, about Cam Jurgens is if Kelsey doesn't practice a lot, what's the approach with Jurgens? Because if you want him to start at right guard this year, especially if he's competing with Tyler Steen, but, so maybe he's featured at right guard, but if he's the long-term guy at center and Kelsey's not practicing a lot, it'll be interesting I think you're going to get an idea pretty early what their plan is at right guard based on what they do with Jurgens if Kelsey doesn't practice a lot.
Definitely so. And on the other side of the ball as well, I think you're going to see guys getting opportunities on different positions, different situations, different personnel groupings, like seeing Kyron Johnson playing off-ball linebacker is going to be very intriguing. Around. Nolan Smith's going to line up all over the ball. Does Nicholas Morrow, if Nakobe Dean isn't in there, does he take over the green dot collar, or do they give it to a safety? Those are the little things that I'm going to look forward to. How do they interchange their safeties right off of the get-go? Are they playing 2 or 3 in base? And I'm just excited to see how Sean Desai approaches it. And
him with the defensive line combinations, I'm also interested in, Gino, like what kind of formations you're seeing, what lineups are out there. Is there certain pairs that he prefers? Like, is it a Fletcher Cox, Jalen Carter kind of thing? So I think that's part of it too, is kind of just to see the rotations and, who's featured and what situations will be interesting too.
And the young wide receivers, man, I'm very excited to see how those guys go out there and play. And maybe even Tyree Jackson, if he could show a little something for us. And just somebody has to show out. There has to be the Paul Turner discussions. There has to be the Deion King, the Reed Blankenship discussions. There has to be those guys that you are willing to say, are we willing to cut him? You want those decisions where it's not like, oh, yeah, he's off the team.
And then you're right. There's guys, too, that you're going to find out real quick. Like Carson Strong was the Shelton Gibson of last year. Where it was instantly they said, oh, this isn't it. I mean, Reed Sinnett played
a whole series in the entire. Yeah, Reed Sinnett was the third guy.
He was the featured third the main quarterback of the preseason last year. So, yeah, I can't wait. Practice begins tomorrow. Head coach Nick Sirianni meets with the media early in the morning. We'll have a show for you later on the day to recap everything that happened right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, Monday through Friday, right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Shout out to our everydayers. We'll be back tomorrow. Until then, for Gino Camilleri, I'm Lou DiBiase signing off. As always, thank you for downloading. Thank you for watching and listening, and let's go Birds.
Fly, Eagles, fly.